President Obama and Speaker Boehner just finished giving their speeches on the debt ceiling. And once again, the President of the United States misled the American public on several fronts. The President said that the Republicans wanted to cut Medicare. That is not true. In fact, his administration slashed Medicare more than the Republicans would ever dream of. They slashed Medicare by $500 billion and put it into the president's illegal health care bill. The Republicans are proposing, or at least Congressman Paul Ryan of Wisconsin is proposing reforms to entitlement programs. They want to reform Medicare and Social Security. They don't want to cut it. So that's the first lie the president told in his speech. Another lie the president told, or really I shouldn't say, this one is more of a ignorance factor. The president said that, stated that if we somehow taking away tax breaks from oil companies and corporations is somehow good for the economy, it would be fair. But the reality is if you take away a lot of the oil subsidies and the tax breaks for the corporations, the cost of goods goes up, jobs are lost or not created, and the American worker, those at the bottom, are the ones who are hurt the most and affected. The president also blamed this crisis in part on President Bush without mentioning him by name. He mentioned the wars that we were fighting and the tax cuts, which, by the way, the tax cuts that President Bush signed increased revenues, didn't decrease revenue, so that's a lie as well. When President Bush left office, we had manageable deficits. Even the president stated that we had manageable deficits when President Bush left office. They weren't acceptable. Certainly, the national debt was not acceptable, but the budget deficit was manageable. And the president basically said, without actually saying, he said we were in a. He basically said that the economic climate forced us to spend more money. And between the failed stimulus bill and the illegal health care bill, look where we are. More debt. He's added more debt he's added $3 trillion, over $3 trillion in debt he hasn't even been in office for a full term yet. President Bush added $5 trillion during his 8 years in office. So that's misleading the public as well. President Obama has proven that he is not competent. He has proven that he does not understand we need serious reform now. We need to cut our deficit, and $4 trillion is not enough. We need $6-7 trillion at least, because let's be honest here. I don't understand how we will be better off in 10 years from now having $10 trillion in debt, which if the president gets his way, we'll still have $10 trillion in debt in a decade from now. If we were to cut the deficit in half, that would be both an achievable goal and a goal in which that we should strive for. The closest anybody's gotten to that is Congressman Paul Ryan's plan. So the president really is misleading Americans, just as his party has. Not much better is what Speaker Boehner did. Speaker Boehner believes that basically he's okay. He's willing to accept, Speaker Boehner and Republican leaders are willing to accept $1 trillion in cuts, maybe $1 to $3 trillion in cuts. I thought that the new Republican majority was supposed to be more fiscally responsible than the president. But instead, while you do have Paul Ryan, who's fiscally conservative, you have other folks who are. A lot of them are now going along with these $1 trillion to $3 trillion cuts. How is that going to help us in 10 years from now? That's worse than the president. So I think that what really has to happen here is you have to cut spending. I think that everybody knows that. You wouldn't know that by watching the Washington politicians like the president and the speaker talk. You wouldn't know that, but people across the country know that you have to cut spending. And I think Americans would probably be open to raising taxes on the wealthiest temporarily to help pay down the debt. I don't think that people making over $379,000 a year would have a real hardship paying a 37 or even 38% income tax rate instead of a 35% income tax rate. That would generate some revenue. And I think we should certainly consider closing some of the corporate loopholes, at least the ones that ship jobs overseas. I think that other corporate loopholes are probably necessary, but the ones that ship jobs overseas, I think we should close. As far as defaulting, I don't think that is an acceptable option. But I think what you're seeing is you have a president who's misleading the public, and you have a speaker who is not being bold and who's not really showing initiative, that is instead willing to accept something less than what is right for the country. And I don't think that either one of them is being honest with the taxpayers and the voters of this country. I don't think either one of them is showing leadership. I don't think either one of them is really right on this issue. I think that Congressman Paul Ryan came the closest to where we need to go. I agree with his plan. I would say get another $800 billion in cuts in his plan, make it so we can cut the deficit in half. His plan right now, the Ryan budget calls for a deficit reduction of 43% over 10 years. I'd like to see that go up to 50%, cut it in half. That should be our goal. If 43% is the closest we can get, so be it. But these numbers that the president and the speaker and other members of both parties are proposing really are not acceptable. We shouldn't accept them. And another thing that I found, the president has shown tremendous hypocrisy. All of a sudden he's all about balance and about compromise. Well, why didn't he compromise when he wanted to stimulate the economy? Why didn't he compromise with this health care bill? These are questions that I think are legitimate. And frankly, the president is supposed to lead. He waits around. This guy waits around for Congress to send him bills. You have how many members of Congress and the Senate? You're not going to get one. It's tough for people to follow them. And people look to their president for leadership on these issues. Certainly, Speaker Boehner has a role to play. There's no doubt about that. Senator Reid has a role to play, but the president is the president, and he's the one who it really and as I heard some of the analysts say, the buck really does stop with the president. He's the leader. He's the commander in chief. So this is extremely disappointing, and in both parties. It isn't just one party. You could make an argument, of course. I think both parties are just about equally disappointing. The Democrats are slightly more so only because at least there are some Republicans like Paul Ryan who are willing to say we really have to cut spending, really more than what the quote-unquote establishment is saying. But there's really no winner or loser in this game either, because from a political standpoint, because if the country defaults, we're all losers. It doesn't matter where public opinion is. It really doesn't. So I think that the president needs to recognize that he needs to stop misleading and scaring the public. He needs to focus more on the budget negotiations than he does on 2012. And I think the speaker needs to actually realize that he wasn't elected to cut spending a little bit. He was elected to cut spending a lot and get this economy moving again. And the president also needs to accept responsibility that he's the one, frankly, that got us into this mess. Okay, there's in his party got us into this mess. The Republicans had a role to play, but for the most part, it's the president. And also, the president should quit whining about the debt ceiling, about how Congress is now going to vote against him, because he voted against President Bush in raising the debt ceiling. So I think that he should just. It's counterproductive what he pinning the blame on the Republicans in Congress is frankly counterproductive. It doesn't work. And I'm not saying that they're necessarily right, but from his standpoint, it's counterproductive. The speaker blaming him on the president, that's probably accurate as to what happened. I'm not saying Speaker Boehner's right, but he probably the responsibility does sit with the president, though part of it does sit with Speaker Boehner.